Whose side are you on? That's a question that comes up frequently in Trigun Stampede, the recent iteration of the classic anime we've talked about on this channel before. The idea of drawing lines in the sand and choosing which side you stand on isn't new to pop culture by any means, and it's almost reflexive how audience members will gravitate to one side or another based on their own personal philosophies and ideologies. A perfect example of this was the endless debating that came out of Avengers Infinity War, the "was Thanos right" conversation. But with the exception of the original anime, we don't often come across protagonists that absolutely refuse to choose one side over the other, even less so when it takes the time to challenge that stance from the perspective of those who would be affected by it. That dive into this version of Vash the Stampede is one of the myriad of reasons why the show is so engaging, and why, if you're a fan of the original, you owe it to yourself to give this one a chance. However, before we dive in, a huge shout out to Celestial Tier Patreon backer Super Sunset for choosing today's video topic. It was a lot of fun to rewatch Trigun Stampede for this, and more details jumped out at me that only deepened my appreciation overall. Celestial Tier patrons will be able to request videos, as well as have special portraits during the credit scroll at the end of each video, and have direct input in the form of a brief spotlight regarding their own feelings about the topic. If that's something that interests you, head on over to Patreon and check it out. Your support is very much needed and will always be appreciated. Links to all relevant socials will be below as usual. Lastly, don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment. Engagement is what tells YouTube that you enjoy the video and gets the algorithm to push my content to others. So, getting back to the topic at hand, Trigun Stampede, which for brevity's sake I'm going to be abbreviating to TriStamp from here on out, had me a little concerned when I initially caught wind of a reboot. I'm a huge fan of the original Trigun series, and like I mentioned earlier, have even covered it on my channel before, which you can check out right here. Like a lot of people, my knee-jerk reaction wasn't a good one. I couldn't help but think, why do we even need a reboot? Leave Trigun alone, it's fine. My concern deepened even further when I heard Studio Orange was the one working on this 12-episode season. Orange is most known these days for their work on Beastars, and while I haven't seen that show, I know its animation style is 3D CG, so the first place my mind went to was Berserk. I went in expecting to hate it, or worse, not feel any kind of way about it at all. So imagine my surprise when any trepidation I had was halted in its tracks during the first episode, and completely eradicated by the time the second episode ended. Yo, future editing Saturn here. I just wanted to add some additional thoughts on some more tangible points that I left out. When I was putting the script together, I fell into a rhythm regarding the themes of the show that I completely forgot to mention a handful of other things that I truly enjoyed about TriStamp. Coming off the back of my previous statement about the low bar Berserk set across the industry for what to expect from CG anime, as well as the okay-ish quality of Beastars just from what little I saw, I was awestruck by just how smooth of a show this is visually. For the first episode, it is a bit noticeable, but I think that's because I was looking for it. It's not pristine, but it's also not offensive. However, by the time we hit the chase sequence in the second episode, I'd already completely forgotten about the CG. TriStamp is beautifully animated from top to bottom with a smoothness that I think will genuinely set the bar for all fully 3D CG anime going forward. On top of that, TriStamp is a very vibrant show color-wise, despite it being set on a desert planet. I never really felt like the show was running into issues of drab or flat palettes. Everything pops in a way that makes your eyes dance, particularly when it comes to many, maybe not all, but many of the character designs. Watching through the first couple of episodes gave me Treasure Planet vibes, and that's how I knew I was locked in. While we're on the topic of aesthetics, let's very quickly talk about Vash's updated character design. I know some hardcore purists were annoyed by it, but I find the modernized approach fits very well. It would be inherently silly to bring back the old design on a one-to-one scale, since OG Trigun was very much a product of its time aesthetically. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I just think that this was a nice pivot. Even I was a little cautious when I saw the new Vash, but it grew on me lightning fast. The modernized approach works for updating many aspects of the world, from the attire of the characters to the technology of the antagonists. I do feel like Knives had a better aesthetic in OG Trigun, but his design here still makes sense in terms of the story itself. A final note, no pun intended, is how immaculate the soundtrack is. Music is an insanely important factor when putting together a gripping story, and if not done well, can unintentionally break the tension by pulling the viewer out of the moment, or worse, ruin a scene entirely. The musical choices here are wonderfully produced and mixed, offering both lovely melodies to just enjoy, but also atmospheric pieces that really hammer home the struggles or sense of adventure traveling with Vash brings. Alrighty, now that that's out of the way, back to the original video. Just wanted to make a few more thoughts known. A quick spoiler warning before we proceed though. I will be talking about varying degrees of spoilers for the anime that I myself wouldn't be happy to hear if I was interested in checking this one out. So if you have even a passing interest in TriStamp, please go watch that first. It's only 12 episodes long and it'll breeze by, I promise. Alright, if you're still here, then either you don't care about spoilers or have seen TriStamp. Either way, let's keep going. TriStamp, first and foremost, is a reimagining of the Trigun narrative. It's been modernized in small ways that shouldn't upset most folk unless they're just hardcore purists, and it does shuffle around certain events as well as characters. But interestingly enough, if we look at it through the lens of the original Trigun, TriStamp is very firmly in prequel territory. TriStamp does something I wasn't expecting but also didn't know I wanted to see, and that's dive deeper into Vash as a character, as well as his relationships to people like Knives and even a side character like Brad. Additionally, the week-to-week random adventures of the original are shuffled out for a much tighter and more emotionally charged narrative. The silliness of Vash as a character is still there in ways that keep the show from getting too grim, but it does take a backseat to the distress, guilt, and loneliness he carries with him. We spend plenty of time laughing with or at Vash, but the writers weren't shy about allowing us to really see how the past still haunts him in ways he doesn't necessarily want others to see. Subtle expressions, body language, or words that linger in the air, it all gives us a much more fully realized character. This duality between Vash's armor made of smiles and laughter, alongside the past he's quite literally running from, get pulled into sharp focus when we circle back to the question that pops up all throughout the runtime of the first season. Whose side are you on? The remix story adds some much needed depth and context to the conflict that rages between Vash and his twin brother Nye, who we'll be referring to as Knives for the remainder of the video. In the original Trigun animation, we spend a great deal of time following Vash on bad guy of the week style shenanigans for the first half of the series. And then on the back end, we deal with a gauntlet of assassins that work for Knives, but Knives himself hangs back until the very end. We get enough information for the story to work the way it does, but as much as I love Trigun, it did leave something to be desired when it came to the relationship between our protagonist and his primary antagonist. However, in TriStamp, we spend a significant amount of time exploring how Vash feels under the surface and how that motivates his actions, as well as why Knives feels the way he does and how that informs his actions. Vash and Knives are both a subspecies of what are known as plants, interdimensional beings that are used by humanity as sources of production for various necessities for survival such as water, electricity, and even food. Created by humans, plants spend their entire lives inside containers to be utilized as necessary. Vash and Knives are what are called independents, meaning they can not only survive outside of the casing their brethren are tethered to, but also possess free will. As a child, Knives was very intelligent but also had an air of superiority about him, and it was clear that he thought of himself above humans not only because of his status as an independent, but the very real power that comes with being one. Vash was more compassionate toward and reliant upon humans because unlike his brother, he did not appear to have any powers as a plant. In terms of emotion and power, he was closer in identity to humans than he was to Knives and the other plants. Following the discovery of horrific experiments humans had carried out on an independent like them, Knives set in motion a plot to crash the spaceships carrying hundreds of thousands of humans onto a desert planet, hoping to wipe them out. However, he does make sure to spare the ship full of plants the same fiery fate. He's only partially successful as some humans manage to escape his treachery, but Vash is implicated in the situation, having unknowingly given Knives the means to enact his plan. Over the decades that follow, the humans that survived the fall built settlements centered around recovered plants, using them to survive the harsh conditions of a planet they were never supposed to be on in the first place. Unfortunately, humanity was prone to using up plants until all of their energy was expended and they died, with Knives himself bearing witness to a particularly brutal instance of this. The carelessness and callousness of humanity towards plants pushed Knives to begin going around the world forcefully reclaiming as many plants as he could find, regardless of what it meant for the communities he'd taken them from. Knives came to see humans as a blight on the world that needed to be wiped out to make room for a species that truly deserved freedom: the plants. Through everything Knives does, it's clear to the audience whose side he's chosen and why he chose the way he did. It's a prime example of understanding the motivations but not co-signing the execution of the plan that spawned as a result. The show does a great job of reinforcing all of the reason Knives looks down on humanity through the way the people he trapped on a desert planet behave in order to survive. He's created a feedback loop that validates his opinions while not understanding his own short-sightedness or the fact that he's a major part of the current equation. Opposite Knives, you have someone like Meryl, who stands firmly on the side of humans because up until running into Vash, her life was relatively normal. It's a knee-jerk reaction when faced with the truth that not only is there more to plants, but that a powerful independent intends to wipe them all out. This version of Meryl is still very naive, having recently become an investigative journalist. It's heavily implied that an education like the one she received is based in the throes of privilege, and that upper-class upbringing becomes clearer as she ventures around the desert seeing how others are forced to live. Meryl is a far cry from the woman we know from Trigun because she's still learning just how unforgiving the world can genuinely be. She lacks patience, she's reckless when it comes to her own safety, and she's quick to pop off at the mouth without really taking in the gravity or reality of a situation. It isn't until her immaturity and carelessness ends up getting someone killed that she finally begins to grow up a bit. But the loss of that life and the understanding of just how hard the people of the planet are fighting just make it solidify her stance on the side of humanity. There are good people, men, women, and children that are just doing what they can to get by. Meryl has seen firsthand what Knives is capable of on his own, as well as the direct aftermath and subsequent suffering of those who walked away with their lives. She's seen the pain and sadness an independent can cause, and although she harbors no ill will towards plants, she doesn't respect them as full life forms who deserve liberation from human control the way Knives does. Meryl sees plants as a necessary resource to keep human life proliferating. Regardless of her grandstanding as well as her friendship with Vash, Meryl has chosen a side. But then there's Vash himself. We've already spoken to some degree about the bittersweet optimism of his character, but TriStamp adds more to that by masterfully integrating a desire for atonement in his story. Now, these themes were present in OG Trigun, but if I had to separate them further, Trigun is more akin to a Western adventure with a focus on hijinks and shenanigans with the occasional addition of emotional insight, whereas TriStamp is much closer to a character piece with a healthy dose of action and shenanigans. The emphasis is much more focused on who Vash the Stampede is. So as a direct result of the tragedy that led humans to occupying the planet of No Man's Land, Vash has done everything he can to atone for the role he inadvertently played. His protection of human life is still tied to the way Rem raised him, but it's far less reliant on that connection this time around. The preservation of human life regardless of what alignment that human falls under is driven more by a quiet need for absolution, even though Vash knows it will be years before the guilt is relieved, if ever at all. There's a moment in the show when Wolfwood mentions that even if the cross you bear is heavy, you still deserve to eat and smile. It's something Vash himself hadn't yet learned, so it's stuck with him. He'd become so used to quietly beating himself down when mistakes are made or lives are lost that he'd forgotten to show himself the same forgiveness he affords others. This follows the complete destruction of Genora Rock at the hands of Knives who had come to reclaim that town's plants. The people suffered heavy casualties, and once Vash's ties to Knives came to light, he was cast out despite the fact he'd known those people for quite some time. Even after being cast out, he still walks away with a somber smile on his face. When Meryl asks how he can still smile after having such awful things said to him, he simply tells her that he doesn't deserve to cry, and we know that that stems from his connection to the Big Fall. How can he allow himself to shed tears when his heart gets broken, when he's partially responsible for the way these people have to suffer day in and day out? To Vash, their tears are more valid and hold more weight, so in his eyes, the right to cry belongs solely to them. At this point in Vash's story, he hasn't quite made it to the love and peace era of his life. Sure, those themes are still at the core of his actions, but they're not his driving forces yet. Even Knives calls him out on this towards the end of the series when he says,
お前はみんなを救うヒーローじゃない。目の前で誰にも死んでほしくない。ただの臆病者だ。
What makes life so tough for this iteration of Vash isn't just his strict no-killing policy, but the complex and loaded question we began this video with. Whose side are you on? It puts him in danger constantly. It sees him assisting people that tried to kill or betray him. It puts him at odds with Knives and just generally confuses his travel companions while simultaneously putting them in danger at times too. All of these issues and conflicts arise because Vash has chosen to do his absolute best to be on everyone's side. He wants to see humans thrive and live in peace on a planet that his brother stranded them on. Despite the cruelty he knows humans are capable of, he's also borne witness to the kindness and compassion people like Rem and those who looked after him are also capable of. Yet he's also keenly aware of and understands the frustration of his brother as an independent. Vash acknowledges the wrongdoings of humanity and how plants are being utilized like nothing more than batteries, yet can also see there might not be a near future where he can live among humans without their fear of him making his life miserable. Humans fear what they don't understand, even more so if that thing is more powerful than them. Yet, unlike humans and Knives, Vash is aiming for a future where there's enough room for both species to coexist on the planet in a harmonious fashion. Humans need plants to survive, and vice versa. Despite their extended lifespans and extraordinary physiology, Vash does not see himself as above humans. It keeps him humble, but also allows him to move through life with a kind of grace most people will never afford others. This grace isn't localized to just those he's surrounded by either. It extends to everyone, people in his past, people he walks alongside currently, people he has yet to meet, and people he will never meet. He wants the best for everyone. He wants to save everyone. There's a character named Rollo in episode 5 that's dying of an unnamed disease and says maybe God won't save him since Rollo doesn't believe in him. Sensing the distress in the child, who puts on a smile and dismisses it when pressed, Vash calls out, 神様が助けないなら、僕が君を助ける! And even when years have passed and Rollo ends up hunting Vash, the humanoid typhoon apologizes for having been late to return and still tries to keep his promise to save Rollo. But seeing that Rollo's mind was already gone, Wolfwood mercy kills him, much to the dismay of Vash, who genuinely felt he could have saved what was left of the boy he knew. Wolfwood then draws our attention to a failing in Vash's approach, calling his words and promises empty. He essentially blasts Vash for talking a big game about saving people but not being able to follow through on those oaths. Part of being able to keep your promises consistently is being in an adequate position of enough power to do so. Power comes in two forms, soft and hard power. Soft power is the capacity to persuade others to do what you want by finding common ground via your ideologies, views, culture, and so on. Hard power is the capacity to coerce others to act in ways they otherwise wouldn't have, usually through military might or economic sanctions. Vash attempts to solve all of his problems and by proxy save lives through the use of soft power. However, the disasters that follow him paint opinions of him before he can even make his case. And when people do like him, like the folks of Genora Rock, all it takes is one calamity to turn them against him, causing any progress he's made to disappear. Yet he's contending with Knives, who's very clearly willing to demonstrate the use of hard power to coerce folk into doing what he requires of them, or curtail any potential problems. With no one to truly rival him the way it would be required to keep people safe, he's free to utilize his pawns to continue subjecting the citizens to terror of all kinds. And this unbalanced clash between Vash's soft power and Knives' hard power is what Wolfwood draws attention to by calling Vash's promises empty words. He lacks the adequate power to guarantee anyone's safety, so it rubs Wolfwood the wrong way when Vash makes his position known. Recognizing when you've made a promise you can't keep, regardless of the good intentions behind that promise, is a sobering reality that plenty of people have had to come to terms with, myself included. Vash's internalized guilt and desire to right the wrongs of the past had prevented him from seeing his own overall powerlessness, which is a very human trait. By the time we make it to the final stretch of the show, we're still hearing about the concept of sides, with characters trying to make the case for their side or deaden the conversation for the opposing side. Even early in Vash's life, when he still lived with characters that survived the Big Fall, a misunderstanding causes a character named Brad to say that Vash was, quote, never on the side of us humans. Even that far back, humans were drawing a distinct line in the sand between themselves and independents like Vash thanks to the actions of Knives. In the following episode, Zazie the Beast, an agent of Knives who speaks on behalf of the life forms tied to the planet known as worms, ponders the question, Zazie themselves are trying to point out to Meryl that siding with Knives in the future of plant kind is more beneficial to the planet than it would be to side with humanity, citing the destructive behavior of humans that forced them to leave Earth in the first place. In that same episode, Vash vows to find a way to save humans, plants, and even Knives too. But Wolfwood tells Vash that the day will come where he needs to choose, again trying to force him to take a side. Although, Wolfwood's push to get Vash to do so comes from a place of understanding in its own way. He can see just how difficult a path Vash has chosen, and after seeing the scars he bears from walking that path, he can see just how steep the price is for saving everyone. The finale of the season brings Wolfwood's warning to the forefront when Knives comes dangerously close to achieving his goal of creating more independents like themselves, which he intended to use to wipe out humanity. Vash was now standing at a crossroads where both paths led somewhere that would result in him losing something precious. Down one road, if he sided with humanity, he'd undoubtedly have to kill his brother, or at the very least, allow their conflict to escalate to the point of a deathmatch. He'd preserve humanity's future, but forever lose the last true connection to the life he had with Rem. Regardless of their incredibly long conflict, Vash still cares very deeply for his brother and wants to find a future where they can also both be happy together. Down the other road, if he failed to stop Knives, Vash would be forced to watch his brother systematically purge the planet of the humans he'd given his blood, sweat, and tears to protect. All of the pain, suffering, and sacrifice that he endured, that many others also endured simply by virtue of him existing, would have been for nothing. It was a lose-lose situation for Vash, so he doubled down on his choice. He came to the fork in the road and went straight. Vash was dead set on finding a way to save humanity and discover a road forward for the plants and his brother. Even with his life and countless other lives on the line, Vash stuck to his convictions. During the final confrontation as Vash and Knives struggle over a cube of dimensional energy, Knives pleads for Vash to side with him so that they can break free from the control of humans and create a paradise for independence free of servitude, fear, and humiliation. But Vash counters with a line that I wasn't quite expecting, but beautifully rounds out and answers the question we started with when he says, TriStamp spent its entire runtime asking you to choose a side, only to turn around at the end and ask you why you even felt that taking a side is necessary. Although the stand-ins here are humans versus plants, it's a very clear allegory for how we as humans see each other and divide ourselves into groups, or allow others to divide us based on traits beyond our control like race, orientation, and economic class. Knives is representative of those who see themselves as above others, whether that's socially, economically, or racially. A mindset of superiority that allows him to look down on those who don't fit into their category or aren't seen as useful. Forces like this often can't see how their own actions and cruelty keep the cycle going that give them the ability to self-validate their own skewed and typically misinformed opinions of those just trying to get by in a world that can be and often is openly hostile toward them. Vash's question comes from a place of genuine understanding of the struggles of day-to-day people who can only take the hand they were given and roll with the punches. People that experience joy, fear, sadness, pain, and grief just like the people who look down on them. Vash recognizes that he's different from others and certainly has many advantages over them, but he knows that he's not better than anyone else. Nor does he allow his experience with one set of people to cause him to write off or condescend to others who've never wronged him. The show does such a wonderful job of getting you so caught up in the idea of siding with one faction over another that Vash's response makes you realize that in one way or another, everyone wants the same thing, which is to just live happily with the people they care about. Everyone's fighting for the same thing, but we get so blinded by what teams we're on that we end up turning other teams who we should be standing united with to build the best possible future for everyone into enemies that we want to see subjugated, fail, or worse, wiped out entirely. But that's not who we should ever want or aim to be as people. The world is already so full of people like Knives who place themselves on a pedestal and see those they deem unworthy as inferior, people who would do harm without a second thought. And though it may hurt sometimes and the right choices might not always be the clearest to see or the easiest to bear, we should all aim to be a lot more like Vash the Stampede and never forget that the fight for love and peace includes everyone, not just the people we care about. Yet we must also not forget that the fight for love and peace is still, in fact, a fight. Another huge shout out to these lovely people for their continued support on Patreon, with a very special thank you to Celestial tier backers Scrub Zero and Super Sunset again for selecting today's topic. Here are her feelings on a particular scene that stood out to her. One of the more profound moments between characters for me is when Roberto points out that Wolfwood is the type of man who can kill with a smile on his face, and Vash responds nonchalantly with, "No, I don't think so." When being questioned why he thinks that, he says with a soft smile, "I can see it in his eyes." I can't decide if Vash is a great judge of character, good at seeing the best in others, or both. However, I see that this line breaks through Wolfwood's cold, hardened exterior just for a moment before he tries to patch the emotional break in response with, "You really mess with me." I think that this moment is pivotal to just how much Wolfwood considers Vash a friend. Remember to take care of yourselves and others. I hope your day's remainder becomes Saturnian, and as always, thanks for watching.